I'm sure Mac has got something to say about the song or some words of wisdom to pass on to you. Mac, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can't wait.
I really don't know what I'm doing up here. I'm not a singer. And Brother Dave, I'm not by any means trying to take your place, so don't be nervous when you're sitting there and I'm trying to sing. But you know, I am so glad that I'm a part of the family of God. It doesn't bother me a bit to do the Lord Jesus Christ's work. I love Him. Maybe people can say, well, you're a show out or something. Maybe I am, but as long as you project Him. And this song that I'm going to try to sing this morning means so much to me. A lot of times, you know, it's what I was and what I am or try to be today. Another thing, when I'm down and when I'm out, when I'm stressed out, as they call it nowadays in time, you know, when I don't feel good or something's not going to suit me, then I hum or I sing or I whistle this song to myself, of course, and it makes me feel good all over. It just changes my whole complexion. And I know when you say, well, I can't sing, I can't carry a tune. The Lord didn't say that. He said just make a joyful noise. That's all He said you had to do. But you know, I know all of you have a favorite song, and I know you sing it to yourself, and you get encouraged, and it builds you up, and it gives you a day to go on. Music does that along with if we don't have time to study the Bible, we can always sing a song that praises Him. Now then, if you'll bear with me and pray for me, I'm going to try my best to sing this song. Shackled by a heavy burden, need the Lord again and shame. In the hand of Jesus touched me, and now I'm no longer the same. He touched me, oh yes, He touched me, and oh, the joy that filled my soul. Something happened, and now I know He touched me and made me new. Since I made my blessed Savior, since He cleansed and made me whole, I will never cease to praise Him, and I'll shout Him all eternity. He touched me, oh yes, He touched me, and oh, the joy that filled my soul. Something happened, and now I know He touched me and made me whole. My friend, if the hand of Jesus has not touched you, don't let another day go by till it happens, and you'll never regret it. Take my word for it, it's forever and ever and ever. Thank you very much. Amen.
your hour of trouble, one touch and you're never the same. 'Cause you'll be trying to catch the crippled man. Did he run past this way? He was rushing home to tell everyone what Jesus did today. And the mute man was telling myself and the deaf girl he's leaving to answer God's call. It's hard to believe, but if you don't trust me, ask the blind man, he saw it all. Ask the blind man, he saw it all. He saw it all.
If anybody would like a note sheet, they're down front here. I tried to pass some out. Travis, I don't know if you can take me out of these monitors, but that'd be great if you can. Well, if you haven't noticed, the Olympics started. Jerry, that may be an old one. You might check. I think that one over there is new. I don't know. The Olympics started. Has anybody watched any of the Olympics yet? Anybody watched? Several of you have. Yeah, you know, I noticed one thing there about those athletes, that no matter what event they're in, they're giving it everything they have. You know, I concluded there's not one single athlete there who's trying to lose. Not one. Am I still on here? Okay, I'm not hearing it there. So there's not one athlete that's trying to lose, because the object of the Olympics is to win, right? Well, in Christianity, it's a little bit different. You know, in this culture, the culture wants to win all the time. They want to do everything they can to win. In Christianity, it's a little bit different. We looked at that last week. We're going to look at that a little bit more this week out of Luke chapter 6. My belief is that it takes more discipline to be a godly Christian than it does to be an Olympic athlete. That's quite a statement, my friends. It takes more discipline to be a godly Christian than it does to be an Olympic athlete. And you know how hard they train. It takes even more discipline for us to be what God wants us to be. Every time, in every way, every day, in every situation, it takes more discipline in that manner. It's easy to be godly when we win. But Jesus calls us to be godly when we lose. And that's what I want to talk with you about today, out of Luke chapter 6. If you just look at the very first part of verse 27, Jesus said, "But I tell you who hear me, love your enemies." The main idea of this whole passage is to glorify God by losing through loving your enemies. Now, this is one of those kinds of sermons that if we don't be careful, it can go in one ear and out the other. Because it's one of those things that we can tip our hat to, but we don't really give it much weight in our lives. So my friends, I want to ask you to put on your spiritual ears this morning. I want to ask you to let God's Spirit work deep inside. I want to ask you to fight off any excuses and fight off thinking, "Oh, I wish so-and-so were here." And say, "God, what do you have to say to me today? What do you have to say to me today?" But I tell you who hear me, love your enemies. You see, sometimes we can hear Jesus without really hearing Him, right? Yeah, we heard what He said, you know. It's kind of like we used to hear maybe a teacher, yeah, we get that, or, sorry if there's any teachers in the room, I didn't mean that personally. Maybe you know how you did your parents sometimes, yeah. Is that, yeah, Jesus, we got it, we know. We're good, all right, we're all right. They would hear Him, but they wouldn't heed Him. He said, love your enemies. My friends, those three words may be the most difficult three words in the entire Bible. Love your, and just in case you wonder, yes, that's the word agape. Agape your enemies. Wow. I think he probably lost half of his audience right there because it was beyond them. You know, when he said that, you can just turn some people off sometimes because they're not really operating in the realm of reality. And that's what they thought about Jesus. You know, all these people gathered together, probably on a hillside somewhere. Jesus says, love your enemies. Who is this guy? He must be a crazy man. What's he saying? You probably don't even know what he's saying. You see, your enemies wouldn't even exist if it weren't for conflict. So this is not just about enemies, it's about conflict. Because conflict is so often present in our lives, isn't it? And maybe those people, we don't call them enemies, but there's conflict. There's things going on there. You see, Jesus knew what he was talking about. Let me just remind you where he lived. He lived in a country where the Romans were dominant, and Roman law was dominant. And the Romans could come in and do things they wanted to. The Jews hated them. So when Jesus says, love your enemies, who are they thinking of? They're thinking of the Romans in their land telling them what to do, governing them with Roman law. And he says, love your enemies. I'm telling you, you think this is hard for you. It was really hard for them. And that's the context that we find ourselves in. You see, Jesus lived in a culture where the Roman enemy was clearly identified. They were hated everywhere. And he says to his people that would listen, love them. Love them. My friends, your enemy is whomever you count as anything but a close friend. You might say, well, I don't have any enemies. Well, okay, who do you not really like that well? Anybody have some of those folks? I know. I see those hands. We'll be praying for you. Now, we have some of those folks, don't we? If we say, who's your enemy? Well, I don't know if I have an enemy. You have some people you don't like very well? Yeah, oh, yeah. Okay, well, I won't mention names. There's several of those kinds of people. That's who he's talking about. Love those people. Maybe they're not full-fledged enemies. Who do you not like? Who can you not stand? Who would you rather not be with? Who do you not want to go to a ball game with? Who do you not want to sit down and watch the Olympics with? Love those people. My friends, this went far beyond the cultural, religious teachings of the day. Just like it does today. Because our cultural Christianity sometimes won't go that far. You might say, be nice, be good. Jesus said, love them, agape them, pour your life out. For God so agape the world, you agape your enemies. Same thing. Matthew chapter 5, verse 43. Jesus said this, you've heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. That's the context he's talking about. You've heard that it was said that way, but I say unto you, love your enemies. The truth is that we find it difficult enough to love those who aren't our enemies. Let's look at the rest of these verses here. Verse 27 and 28. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you, and pray for those who mistreat you. I think he's saying glorify God by losing through rejecting your pride. All of this is all about loving your enemies. The overarching banner of everything he's talking about and we're looking at today is love your enemies. There's a couple of things under that. Now he's talking about rejecting your pride. Look what he says. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. Are you kidding me, Jesus? Do you know what they did? Do you know who they are? Do you know how they treated me? Yes, I know. Love them. Bless them. Do good to them. He says three things here. Show them beneficial deeds. Do actions that help your enemy. Now think about that. Actions that help your enemy. Nobody in their right mind would do that. But Jesus told us to do that. Beneficial deeds. Also benevolent words. Look what he said. Bless those who curse you. Give speech that uplifts your enemy. That uplifts your enemy. Because so oftentimes we want to give speech that doesn't really uplift our enemy, don't we? They say something to us, boy, we could come back with a cutback. Anybody good at cut downs? And we're probably pretty good, aren't we? Maybe we've mellowed a little bit, but we can still snap them right out pretty good, can't we? Jesus said, bless those that curse you. Build them up with your words. Then he said, pray for those who mistreat you. Pray for them. I want to hurt them. Jesus, you don't understand. I think he understood. Pray for those who mistreat you. Offer petitions to strengthen your enemy. My friends, this is how you treat enemies in the kingdom of God. This is how you do it. Not like the world does it. Not like your neighbors do it and people you know. Not like that. Jesus called us to something way beyond that. Way beyond that. I'm afraid sometimes we can't even treat people in the church like this. And so I question, can we treat our enemies like this? This is what he's called us to. And for any of this to happen, you will have to reject all of your pride. All of your pride. Because you can't have any pride and reach out to your enemies. You can't do them any good. You can't bless them with pride in your heart. You will not pray for them as long as there's pride in your heart, because your pride says, I'm better than them. I'm not going to bless them or pray for them for sure. Now, if he said curse them, I'm ready for that one. I can handle that. In fact, I'm pretty good at that. It's said that in South America, they'll gather up some llamas, and they don't actually need a fence. All they do is they put a rope about this high, and the llama, for some reason, won't bow down. And the llama is seen in South America as a symbol for pride, because all it has to do is bow its head down and go underneath. But it won't do it. So a single rope will keep a herd of llamas inside that rope. Now, my friends, pride for us does similar things. We've got to bow low to get down to where God wants us to be. There's a saying, and I'm not sure, it's probably an Eastern saying that says, when you bow, bow low. Because that gets rid of all pride. Bow low, because only when you bow low can you love your enemies. Only when you bow low will you ever be able to bless your enemies. Only when you bow low will you ever be able to pray for those who mistreat you. Or for those who just don't like you. Or for those who you'd rather not be with. Or for those who you hope you don't have to talk to or greet. See, pride keeps us from expressing a true Christian biblical love. Look at verse 29. If someone strikes you on one cheek, turn to him the other also. If someone takes your clothes, do not stop him from taking your tunic. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. Glorify God by losing through forsaking your rights. It's all about loving our enemies, and when our enemies do things to us, what we have to do is forsake our rights, or our perceived rights. You see, it's often because we cling to our perceived rights that others see a cultural Christianity instead of an authentic one. I want you to hear that. It is often because we cling to our perceived rights that people see a cultural Christianity in us rather than our authentic Christianity that they should see. They see the cultural one, the one that looks like everybody else, the one that lives easily in a culture of affluence and in this country. Because we cling to our perceived rights. We're no different, oftentimes, than people outside the church walls. We do what they do. Somebody hits us, we hit them back. They mistreat us, we mistreat them back. Maybe we give them double. Jesus said, not so, followers. You have to be different. I'm calling you to a different kind of lifestyle. It's very difficult, but that's the calling on our lives. Where do you see Jesus standing up for his rights? Where do you see Jesus telling his disciples to stand up for their rights? Exactly. Exactly. And that's what he's saying here. That's what he's saying. He addresses 4 areas. If someone strikes you, turn to him the other cheek also. A physical kind of injury. If someone takes your cloak, do not stop him from taking your tunic. They're stealing your possessions at that point. Give to everyone who asks you. You know, poor people on the road that might come up to you. That happens, doesn't it? Jesus says, be a giving person. So financial requests that come your way. And then he says, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, following on the heels of give to everyone who asks you. So I think there's a financial implication to that too. Maybe it's some kind of a manipulation. Maybe it's some kind of almost a stealing kind of thing. But he addresses these 4 areas. And so the question arises, does Jesus call us to be a doormat? And the answer is no, I don't think so. I don't think that's what he's saying. But, my friends, when we hear no, we often conclude, well, good, I can do what I want to then, because Jesus didn't call me to be a doormat. And we miss everything he's saying. We miss exactly what he's saying, the whole point he's trying to communicate here. And he's giving us a caution here. When people strike you, live this way. When people take your possessions, live this way. If they hurt you, live this way. When they ask of you, live this way. He's teaching that our attitude must go beyond demanding our rights, beyond the common ethical response of the day, which had and has no Christianity in it. You see, when I say, is he calling us to be a doormat, and I say no, you say, good. But you're missing it if that's what your response is, because what he's saying is, don't live like everybody else. Let your Christianity so impact your life that it makes a difference when these things happen to you. A radical difference. Maybe you don't hit them back. And maybe you don't turn the other cheek and say, hey, could you do that again? I like that. That's not what he's saying. But because your Christianity is real and you follow him, it makes a huge difference in how you respond. That's what he's saying. That's what he's calling us to. He's teaching that his followers must base their responses to injustice not on their rights, but in God's grace and God's mercy. How do we respond when somebody hurts us or injures us or does us harm? Do we demand our rights? No. The follower of Christ doesn't demand their rights back. It's based upon God's grace and God's mercy. That's how we respond. Now, I know that's hard. I know that's hard. But that's what we're called to. That's what we're called to do. That's what we're called to live up to. That kind of response. You see, the answer is not our rights and revenge and retribution. The answer is forgiveness and compassion and grace. How do you respond? Now, my friends, I'll remind you, but I tell you who hear me, as Jesus said. Some of you may have already turned me off. I hope you haven't. I know it's hard teaching, but it is his teaching. It is His teaching. When people hurt you, the follower of Christ said, Lord, I don't want to take revenge. I don't want retribution. Help me respond in compassion and mercy and grace. Though it's hard, though it's difficult, though it may be the hardest thing I've ever done, God, I want to respond in a way that honors you. And I can only do that through mercy and grace and forgiveness. Someone once said, blowing out the other person's candle won't make your candle shine any brighter. That's true, isn't it? That's true. You will only be able to answer the wrongs done to you with forgiveness and compassion and grace by forsaking your perceived rights for the benefit of the glory of God. That is your motivation. How can you do this? How can you live this way? The only way you can live this way is to say, God, I want you to be honored in my life above everything. I die to my rights. I die to my perceived rights. You be glorified in me and help me respond in mercy and grace and forgiveness. That's the only way. It is impossible without that. Absolutely impossible. To live for the glory of God is to die for the glory of self. That's what He's teaching us here, my friends. That's what He's teaching us. In other words, when you suffer an injustice, either real or imagined, in a godly way, God is glorified. Either real or imagined, and you do it in a godly way, God is glorified. God is glorified. And when you fight back, He's not. He's not. And that's why He calls us to love our enemies. Look at verse 31. Do to others as you would have them do to you. You see here, you are to take the lead. You don't respond out of revenge. You respond out of grace. Do to them as you would have them do to you. You start it. Don't sit back and say, well, I'll wait. When they come to me, I'll start it. Then I'll reach out to them. No, you start it. Because you're a follower of Christ. Verse 32. You getting the idea that this losing is no fun? It's not fun. Except that we know we're honoring our King when we do it. When we live this way. We honor Jesus. That's fun for the Christian. Verse 32. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies. Do good to them. And lend to them without expecting anything back. Glorify God by losing through overcoming self-righteousness. Through overcoming self-righteousness. The sinners, it was known, were about three different kinds of people. They were the irreligious people that had no use for God at all. They were known as sinners. The tax collectors, because they were either Roman or they were Jews who had sold out to the Romans so they could have their job. Hated, despised people. And the prostitutes. Those were the sinners of the day. And so what Jesus is saying here is, you do these things, the sinners do those things. The people you despise do those things. You exchange love for love. You do good to those who do good to you. You lend to those who repay. Basically, Jesus was saying, you're no better than the sinners. You're no better than the prostitutes and the tax collectors. And the irreligious people of the day, they do those things. In effect, He's saying, if your religion consists of this and this only, you have a worthless religion. If this is how you live, it's worthless. It means nothing. Verse 35, but love your enemies. Do good to them. And lend to them without expecting anything back. The same three acts Jesus mentions here, this time with a deeper expectation for his followers. Romans 5:10, I want to remind you of something. Romans 5:10. For if, while we were God's friends, no, enemies, if while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his Son. And my friends, we were. Why? Because he loved us. So he reconciled his enemies to himself. You're called to do the same thing. You're called to have that kind of love that reaches out to those people you'd rather not talk with. You'd rather not be with. You'd rather not sit with. That's the kind of love we're called to live. I know it's hard. I know it's difficult. This is what you signed up for when you came to Christ. Love them in this way. Love them, do good to them, lend to them, seek their benefit, do good things to them, loan to them without expecting anything to be returned to you. There's three levels of affection, basically, that we have. And one is the first level of affection. It's almost not even a level of affection. It's called kind of a level of toleration. We tolerate people. Right? It's just kind of a careless kind of an affection, almost no affection at all. It's kind of like, you know, if you don't bother me, I won't bother you. We'll get along here and things will be fine. Second level is a level of accommodation. There's a little bit more affection here, but it's kind of a comfortable lifestyle where I can do something for you and you might do something for me, as long as it's not too hard. You know, we can get by, we'll get along, and we'll be friends this way. Let's just don't get too radical here. Now, most relationships are those two levels. Level 1, level 2. Toleration or accommodation. The third level is the level of restoration. This is a level where it's very costly. That in a relationship, my goal, my aim in life is to bring restoration into someone's life. And there are times when that costs me, most of the time, in fact. It takes my effort, my energy, everything I have, because I'm trying to build something into someone else. That's the level that Jesus said, live at this level with your enemies, live at the level of restoration, build them up, encourage them, bless them, seek their good, pray for them. It's going to cost you to live like Jesus called you to live. It's going to cost you. In 2007, Starbucks chairman sent a message to the CEO. And apparently Starbucks had kind of changed some things. And they were going through this big expansion. And apparently at one time they kind of had their big, I don't ever go to Starbucks, so I don't know what they have. But coffee to me is just ungodly. It just smells ungodly, everything about it's ungodly. But apparently they had their coffee beans, and you could go in and they would crush them, and there was an aroma that just filled the whole place. And the chairman sent a letter to the CEO. He said, we have, expanded our stores and everything, but at what cost? Apparently they changed some things. We have lost the aroma of the coffee, filling the place. And I want to say, church, we've lost the aroma. We've lost the aroma of what Jesus called us to be and called us how to live. We've lost the love that defines Christianity in the way that He wants it defined. We have lived with a comfortable, soft, easy, comfortable kind of love in our lives. If you don't bother me, I won't bother you. But we've lost the kind that says, if you're my enemy, I'll lay my life down for you. I'll give it all for you. I want Christ to be honored in my life, so I'm going to love my enemies. I'm going to love those who treat me badly. I'm going to love those who won't look at me or talk to me. I'm going to love those who go by on the other side, even in church. I'm going to love them. We'll never live this way until we rid ourselves of all of our self-righteousness. We can't. Self-righteousness is what keeps us from laying down our lives. And He called us to live this way. And you can't do that with any self-righteousness in your life. We must get rid of it all. Now, we would never say it, But sometimes we think we're above other people. We think we're better than them. You know, I'm up here and they're a little, you know, they're not bad, but they're just not quite to where I am yet. Maybe they'll get there someday. God can be glorified in a self-righteous life. God can be glorified in a self-righteous life. There's not many things you can say God can't. But He can't be glorified in a self-righteous life where I think I'm better than someone else. Because when I think I'm better than you, I will not lay down my life for you. I will give you a toleration kind of love, maybe an accommodation kind of love. I will never give you a restoration kind of love when I think I'm better than you. That won't happen. We overcome self-righteousness by laying down our lives. That's what we're called to here. Love your enemies. Agape your enemies. Work for them. Bless them. Strengthen them. The rest of verse 35. Then your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. Glorify God by losing through imitating your Father. Glorify God by losing through imitating your Father. That's what you're called to do, my friends. Just imitate the Father. Imitate the Father. You know, Jesus said, what I have seen my Father do, I do. What we have seen Jesus do, that's what we're called to do. Imitate the Father. Imitate the Son. Look at what it says right there in the middle of verse 35. Love your enemies, do good to them, lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then, that's a huge word. Then, your reward will be great. The reward is conditional upon the fulfillment of the commands. You do not get the reward because you fulfill the commands. You fulfill the commands because you're a child of God. And the reward comes from that. You see, it's obedience that proves the relationship is genuine. He's saying, since God is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked, who are you kind to? Is it the ungrateful and the wicked? Since God is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked, so you be loving to your enemies. As your Father is merciful, so you be merciful. Be like Him, just like Him. There's no room for pride. There's no room for our perceived rights. There's no room for any self-righteousness. Be like the Father. That is your calling. Years ago, there was a commercial, be like Mike. You know, I had the cute little catchy tune. Be like Mike. I want to be like Mike. What he's saying, be just like the Father. Be just like Him. Let your goal in life to be like Him. Don't let your goal be to be saved. Don't let your goal be to be comfortable. Let your goal be to lay your life down and pour it out so that Christ looks amazing in your life. That is your calling. That's what we're called to, my friends. You see, Christianity is revolutionary, and you're not living it unless you live a revolutionary Christianity. When He said love your enemies, He's talking revolutionary. He's talking, this is not of this world, folks. This is different. You can't do it on your own. You can't do it walking the way this world walks. You have to walk on your knees in prayer and dependence upon the Father, or you can't live this way. Complete dependence. It's revolutionary. It loves when it's hated. It blesses when it's cursed. It serves when it's mocked. It forgives when it's wrong. It gives when it's asked. It reaches out to the wounded. It encourages when discouraged. It uses words for comfort and not as weapons. It uses finances for godliness and not selfishness. It unites and not divides. It heals and not injures. It overcomes and not succumbs. It doesn't count transgressions. It doesn't seek revenge. It doesn't keep score. It doesn't become childish. It doesn't get even. It doesn't grow weary. And it doesn't quit. It doesn't run away. It doesn't hold grudges. It hears hard truths and receives difficult lessons. It serves. It encourages, it builds up, it lays down its life, it reaches down to the lowest and up to the highest. It pours out to the least and the last and the lost. It dies when it lives, and it lives when it dies, all for the glory of God. That's your call. That's your call. He called you to be a revolutionary, and nothing short of that. You do that by loving your enemies. That's revolutionary. It's easy to be godly when we win. Jesus calls us to be godly when we lose. So how do you measure up? How do you measure up? I bet right now, if each of you tries, you can think of some people that may not be enemies, but maybe you have some people you would call enemies. But I know you can think of people that you wouldn't call close friends. Now you know what Jesus expects of you. Now you know. You have no excuse. He calls you to agape now. Just like He did for us while we were once enemies. That's the good news of the gospel, isn't it? While you were once a filthy, rotten, dirty, scoundrel enemy to God, He loved you so much that He drew you near to Himself. Now you be a vessel for someone else. And love your enemies. I don't know what God may say to you today. You don't have to stand. You don't have to sing. You can sit. You can go outside. Whatever God says to you, that's all that matters at this point. That's all that matters. Thank you. Let's stand there.